Hello, and welcome to a new edition of Need to Know, a series of video interviews with companies who are shaping, creating, and innovating in the games industry today, and whose work will have a huge impact going forwards into the future. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Andy Barker, Mind Fitness, here to talk to us all today about mental health first aid and its importance in the games industry, especially in those work environments. Before we get going, though, Andy, it's lovely to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, happy
Do
to
you want
be
to tell
here.
our
Thanks for asking me.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell our viewers a little bit about your background and what it is that you do to get us started?
My background is in the games industry. So I was with PlayStation for many years, but also as a sort of side hustle at the time, I started getting involved in coaching and training largely because I was trying to find specialist trainers to help train my team and teams, and we couldn't find the right types of trainers, so we developed our own, and that was the beginning of my journey as a trainer. Now working, in the kind of education sector, but my background is still, very much from the game industry, and most of the work that we do is in the games industry. So I get the sort of best of both worlds.
Fantastic. I didn't realize that was how you got started.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's really good to hear. So we should jump straight in then. I mean,
Mm.
it'd be wonderful to hear from you sort of what exactly mental health first aid is and what it's all about.
So mental health first aid is different from maybe mental health awareness training in that it's aligned to first aid training. So if you can think about first aid training, physical first aid, the overarching objective of first aid is to preserve life. And the same is true of mental health first aid. So if you can imagine, having the skills to, if somebody, and I'm talking about physical first aid here, has an accident and you need to stem a flow of blood, for example, you'll have techniques that you can do to do that, and wait until a qualified clinician comes along and can take over. And the same is true in terms of mental health. So a mental health first aider could be the first person that somebody who is having a crisis or is overwhelmed in some way. It could be the first conversation that person ever has with someone. And the premise of mental health first aid is to signpost that person and support that person so that they can start to get the help and support that they need from a clinical perspective. So it's a lot about talking, about giving options and ideas and information, and supporting the person to get, I suppose, at the beginning of a journey to recovery. So it's not just about understanding a little bit more about mental health. It's about being there to do positive steps with that person to support them to get to the next stage.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there about the sort of the more general mental health awareness training. And I suppose it maybe encompasses an element of this, but also a bit more on the practical side.
It's both. So the company I run, Mind Fitness, we run a whole range of mental health training programs, from mental health skills for managers, mental health awareness, and obviously the most kind of involved and in depth is mental health first aid. So mental health first aid encompasses and involves understanding more about things like mental health conditions, spotting the signs that somebody could be struggling or in crisis, um, and but also then giving practical steps as to how you support that person. So it's with mental health awareness training, it's just being aware. It's having the awareness to understand more about the subject of mental health. And that's useful and really important because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of myths and mystery that surrounds the the phrase mental health. There's a huge gap for so many people in their knowledge. But mental health first aid goes that bit further. It educates people, but it also gives people skills to support an individual. So active listening, for example, how you really listen with attention, a lot of tools that you can have in your armory, as it were, or your workbox, to give people things that they can do to support themselves, and routes that they could explore going on. So an element further than just understanding. It's having practical tools and being able to apply those tools with a degree of confidence.
Absolutely. No, that makes an awful lot of sense. And I mean, you mentioned sort of active listening and having almost an array of tools at your disposal when you become trained as a mental health first aider. But would you be able to sort of talk about what a mental health first aider would actually sort of do day to day in a sort of work environment, in either a studio or an office, perhaps?
Hmm. So the first thing that a mental health first aider does is make sure that everybody knows they're a mental health first aider, because there's no point in doing the training and then sitting sort of silently, not being there available. So not what we normally encourage people to do is have ways to share that, so that information. I'm a mental health first aider, and then it's being there available. So there's a sort of two-way street. It's making sure that people know that you're available for a conversation should they wish to have that conversation. And again, the training supports a way of approaching this so that time is made for having an in-depth, a really helpful, useful conversation. So, when are you going to have that conversation? Where are you going to have that conversation? How can that take place? So, a mental health first aider will be there for people, um, but um, but it may be that that mental health first aider will also spot the signs that somebody could be struggling,
Mm.
and so it's developing a kind of a second or a sixth sense, I suppose, an intuition that things may not be okay. And so we train people to spot those signs, not just in the workplace, the physical workspace, but also remotely as well, because obviously so many people now, especially in the games industry, work remotely. They work in a whole range of countries. So teams, maybe, I don't know, 10, 20 people in a team, maybe, in a number of different countries. So, we train people around understanding potential cultural differences, sensibilities, that sort of thing. And so the role of an MHFAider, as Mental Health First Aid England now calls them, is about being available, but also being attuned to spotting the signs that somebody could be struggling, and not just in the physical space, but in the remote space as well.
Absolutely. You mentioned sort of being available or known there. I wonder, from your perspective, what would you say the limits of an MHFA aider? Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm stumbling over it.
It's taken me ages to get to the MHFAider. The amount of times I've stumbled over
MHFAider.
that.
No,
Yeah, call it a
it
mental
rolls
health
off the
first
tongue.
aider there. It's a much easier thing. Yeah, it's like so much
I'll
easier.
try my best.
Sorry, the question was,
So you mentioned sort of making colleagues or people around you aware of being
yes.
a mental health first aider, but I mean, from your perspective, what would you say the sort of limits of the role might be? In terms of maybe taking on too much, or
Mm,
always being on call, as it were,
mm.
perhaps.
Great
Yeah.
question. So, and a really important one as well. So during the course, we allocate a section to specifically looking at boundaries and boundary setting. So it's very easy to become the go-to person. And of course, if you're happy to do that, if it's a colleague maybe that you have friendship with, or a lot of rapport with, and you choose to do that, then that's absolutely fine. But it may not be applicable, and so we give people tools and ways to set expectations. So one of the things we do is make sure that people ask MHFAiders ask questions around, if it's not me, who else, in your orbit would you feel comfortable speaking with? And
Hmm.
and can I support you in making contact with them? And it could be another colleague, it could be a family member, it could be, it could be anyone else. Um, but it can be quite involved. It can be quite difficult because in the process of developing that rapport with a person, um, that person can become very aligned, if you like, and trust. There's a lot of trust built in, and so it's supporting that person to move on to the next stage, if you like. Now that could be through a charity, it could be through an employee assistance program, it could be through a clinician and a doctor, and having that ability to move to the next stage, because that's really the point of the work that you do. It's about being the first responder and then handing off to someone who's better qualified to manage that person's challenge at that time. But boundary setting is so difficult, can be so difficult. It's easy to talk about. That's the line, that's the demarcation line. Managing it in practical terms can be quite difficult. I've been a mental health first aider for many years before I trained as an instructor.
Mm.
And it's been quite challenging over the years on occasion to just find a way of allowing that person to move on to the next step, and managing
Mm.
that. So yes, it's a great question, and it's probably one of the most challenging things in the role is having the ability to look after ourselves, make sure we're okay, whilst making sure that the person we're supporting is okay as well. It's a very fine balance at times.
Definitely, I think the comparisons with first aid are relatively helpful there in some respects. You might be able to, as a first aider, more generally, you might be able to help someone with a seizure or
Mm.
an accident or something. But in terms of the rehabilitation or I don't know, an operation or something like that, that's not your responsibility as a first aider. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and obviously, like you say, boundaries in especially in workplaces, it's relatively difficult sometimes you know, um, to put them in place, really. But it's good that that's part of the training itself.
It is, and
So,
it's and it didn't used to be, but it is now, because obviously it became quite a big thing. And boundaries also can be around confidentiality. So when is it prudent to be confidential, and when is it not? And safeguarding is a part of this as well. So
of course.
when what you tell me becomes something that I need to tell someone else, despite your saying you don't want me to do that, because your safety is my primary concern. So it's
Mhm.
the boundary setting is sort of quite a multiple thing of considerations, and that's why I suppose I'm saying it's can be one of the biggest challenges is being clear as to where that line sits, and it can shift and blur, and it can be a real a real challenge. But and more so, I suppose, than in physical first aid, when the ambulance arrives, if we put it like that, and the person gets in, that's
Exactly.
that's it. And you may never see them again, in terms of if it's supporting somebody in the street or something, you'll never know what happens to that person. But with mental health first aid, it's a much more personal experience.
Of course, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and sort of thinking about that element of maybe seeing these people sort of day in, day out. From your experience, how do you feel sort of introducing mental health first aid training um, sort of influences the workplace culture, as it were? So if we are sort of dealing with our teams and co-workers and everything, how does it benefit individuals from a team perspective, I suppose?
So I think the answer to that question is that it can have a profound effect on creating a much more compassionate, open uh, uh, team structure and culture within the organization. And it's not an absolute given. Everybody's got their own unique way of embedding mental health first aid. Innovating companies tend to have mental health first aid as part of an overall cultural shift in the way that they view mental health, well-being, and making a really kind, compassionate environment for everybody who works there. Um, so how does it benefit? So I think the first thing to mention is that there is a lot of data now to support the fact that investment in mental health training has a very well established return on investment. So some studies would indicate that for every pound spent, you get a £10 return on that investment. Some other studies say, well, it's a £4 return on that £1 investment. So that is in terms of reduced absenteeism, not having the element of people turning up for work who are not well and shouldn't be at work, and that can be presenteeism. Presenteeism is a bigger problem than absenteeism. Um, People who leave businesses because they can't cope anymore. The pressures on them may be so great. So there's obviously cost of recruitment around that, but also retention. And we know in the games industry that the retention of talent is always a huge challenge to find the right people. And so to give people an environment where everybody matters, everybody is cared for, um, that has benefits. So mental health first aid isn't in itself a panacea. It makes huge differences, don't get me wrong, but normally it's part of a whole initiative to change or update or upscale the culture within that organization. And we're working now with game studios who have the most extraordinary cultures, where people work in really great environments, virtually never leave, which I suppose can be a bad thing as well, just putting that one out there. But and so the people sort of leading, it's not just a box ticking exercise. It's a move to make the workplace a kind, compassionate, caring place, but where people can work hard, can and if anyone is struggling, that it's an open environment. You can be yourself. You can turn up as you and not have to mask and hide for fear of being stigmatized and discriminated against. So you've got ends of the scale here. I have to say, I think the games industry now is incredibly innovative. From the studios that we visit and the clients that we have, there's some great work going on. And if you go out of the industry, it's not the case. We're not where we should be within the industry. There's a huge movement towards really treating people with respect and kindness and compassion, much more so than the general working world, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really, really good to hear. And I suppose, the games industry itself is a fabulously creative industry, and ultimately, happy people work better when they're or
Mm.
produce more creative sort of endeavors when they're at the happiest, I suppose. And earlier on, you mentioned some of those studies about sort of the return on investment and how mental health first aid sort of reduces absenteeism and presenteeism as well. I wondered if you had any sort of thoughts on, perhaps some people might see this as a nice to have, an extra bonus, rather than something that's sort of crucial or essential, maybe from sort of leadership, I suppose, from
Hmm.
management. How would you address those kinds of concerns?
So those attitudes still exist, that it's a nicety, not a necessity. And clearly that's still seen by some leaders as being the case. Um, what I do see is there's a little bit of a divide. I mean, I'm of an old school now. I'm a sort of um, bit of an old dinosaur, really. And so I'm old enough to remember, when the subject of mental health was never discussed at all. It was absolutely, nothing to see here. But as younger leaders come in and the entrepreneurs come in, um, I'm seeing people who really do take it seriously. It's not a box ticking exercise.
Mm,
So more often, I mean, we are still asked, what can you do for us? Have you got a course that lasts an hour? Or can you do us a talk for 45 minutes on mental health? And we'll do that because, it's better than no talk at all. But the businesses who come in and say, look, we want to bring you in to to train up our mental health first aiders. We want to make sure that we've got enough to cover the amount of people that we have. We want to make sure that everyone is on the same page, where we want everyone to have mental health awareness training. We want our leaders to have mental health for leaders or managers training, because there's some very specific things about leading people and the need to know. And those are the companies who, are not doing the box ticking exercise. And every time, there's a recruitment, a new tranche of people coming in, then the training is rolled out for those people. So the culture within the business is absolutely embedded. Um, but of course, there's a cost attached to that. There cost, not just the monetary cost, but the cost in time. And one
mm.
thing I'm very aware of is that any busy game studio doesn't have people sitting around waiting to be told what to do next. They're frantic and getting on with stuff. So it's a fine line. And anything I say is not a criticism. It's just the real world is, it's very difficult uh, to deliver that kind of vision of what a business with a compassionate culture is like, whilst running a business in a competitive way. So it's a very fine balance, and I'm acutely aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously an awful lot of um, stuff going around about empathy and how important that is in the
Mm.
workplace as well. I mean, you mentioned as well, that busy, fast-paced, fast-moving environment that the games industry sort of occupies.
Yeah.
What about sort of hybrid and remote work? How has that changed the way we sort of think about supporting mental health and well-being at work? Out of curiosity.
Well, it's certainly changed things. And there are quite a few facets and aspects of remote working. So we work with studios who are remote only. And that's always interesting, because there are people who maybe have never physically met face to face.
Mm,
And that does happen. And it works. It seems to work okay. And but the challenges and the risks there you have is that you may miss the signs that somebody is not in a great place. So supporting colleagues who are remote only is a little bit more challenging, because if I turn up for a meeting in this environment, in the Zoom environment, or in the other platforms, and then my camera is off, well, is that because I'm not in a good place, or is it because my kitchen is being renovated in the background, or my child is ill and is working, or being schooled at home that day. So it's very difficult to take a view on that. Um, but also you've got people spread far and wide, or you've got partly, blended. So you've got some people who come to the studio 3 days a week or 4 days, and so it's very different from the old days. And let's face it, the old days were what, 5 years ago, where everybody came into work. We didn't have really the option to have too much remote working. So I think lots of businesses have tried to run to keep up with the challenges of having either blended or remote only workforce. But you can train people in spotting the signs, and there are ways of initiating best practice around that in terms of the way that you structure your time. So you don't just have formal meetings online. We have companies who have these coffee catch-ups. So I might book I don't know, 15 minutes with you, Leo, and just say, on Friday morning at 9:30, fancy a coffee catch-up. And we probably won't talk about work. I might, tell you about what I'm going to do at the weekend. You might tell me about, how your holiday was, or whatever it's going to be. And it tries to emulate that, what they call the water cooler moments in the office, in the physical office environment. And many companies have found very effective ways of doing that. But that's twofold, really. It's to get rapport and people understanding each other more. It's not just that sort of dry business-based relationship that we have, but
Mm.
that friendship, that allyship that develops when you work closely with people. Um, but it's also about knowing someone well enough to spot if you don't seem okay, and having the confidence to say, you know, Leo, is everything okay? How are you feeling? Are you okay? Do you want to have a chat? Whereas if you don't have that rapport, it's very difficult to do that. You don't feel confident about doing that, and also the person who's being asked sort of thinks, you know, mind your own business. You know, I'm okay, So it is a new challenge, and many organizations are finding really innovative ways of developing that cultural mix. But by that I mean, the ability to really create strong um, rapport and camaraderie within teams outside of just having formal meetings. And
Mm.
within that is also, the mental health remit, making sure, checking in, is everything okay? And we have a close enough relationship that if it's not, you feel comfortable to tell me about that, and we can start to have a conversation. Nothing to do with work. It's to do with how I feel. Yeah.
Mm. No, it's really, really. I mean, it's really brilliant to hear that the industry is adopting some of these sort of these ideas. I mean, you mentioned there sort of you hinted at a couple of signs maybe that might indicate colleagues are struggling, perhaps in these. Well, both remote and in person,
Mm.
perhaps. Would you be able to sort of expand on some of those sort of signs that might indicate that someone's struggling?
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about the work that we do as mental health first aiders is we're not there to diagnose. And that takes an awful lot of pressure off, because, we're not clinicians. We haven't been trained for years. Um, so, but what we are able to do is spot the signs of change. Now, to spot the signs of change, you've obviously got to know people reasonably well. But if and again, I'll give you an example of the physical office environment. I know plenty of people who, if they go into the office on a Friday, they may in the after work on a Friday finish maybe a little bit early, cheekily, and then maybe adjourn to the pub. You know, when I was at PlayStation, the big thing on a Friday in London was people used to meet up in the canteen, and it was beer o'clock. And people stayed 20 minutes, half an hour, some people 4 hours, whatever. But it was a great, it built bonds. And so, in that scenario, if somebody was, you know, going to these things and then stopped going
Mm.
for no real apparent reason, or just kept making excuses, that could be a sign. Because, again, one of the signs that somebody is struggling is that that person stops doing the things that give their life purpose and meaning.
Mm.
So, that all goes out the window, as does, you know, uh, just being sociable can be a challenge. So they could be signs, but then also it could be a sign that someone is, busy because they're learning Japanese, or, so you've got to be very careful about, being too searching, but to ask somebody, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Could
Mm.
begin a conversation, and uh, being alert to, is this person presenting in a way that I'm normally used to them presenting it? Are they behaving in a way that
Mm.
I'm normally used to them behaving in? And it could be the beginning of an understanding of, maybe I'll just approach them and see if they want to talk. But one of the other attributes of a mental health first aider is having patience, because that person may not want to talk, um, and may not want to engage, and then may do it at a later time. So again, it's making sure I'm here for you. If you ever need a chat, don't hesitate. I'm here, and establish, that you're there for them should they wish to do that.
Absolutely. I think that makes an awful lot of sense, and especially, considering the again, back to the sort of remote work aspect of everything these days, and sort of linking that back together. I
Hmm.
think I think it'd be interesting to hear as well. I mean, you hinted at a couple of them there, but sort of a bit of an understanding of some of the sort of skills or key techniques that mental health first aiders would would hope to learn from training with you.
I think communication skills is a huge part of this, because you can understand a little bit. I mean, you can understand more about certain mental health conditions. You can understand more about, the how common this is. 25% of the population of the world lives with a mental health condition at any one time. So this is not a niche thing. So a lot of people out there may be struggling or living with a mental health condition. So, having people understand those conditions. So there's a lot of destigmatizing, demystifying. So so although you're not there to diagnose, you understand more about the conditions. And part of the role of an MHFAider or mental health first aider is um, is using things like language that support a better understanding, language that destigmatizes. So there's still a lot of language that you hear used out there that comes from another time, and so using the right language to support a better understanding is part of this. But a huge part of the role is communication skills. So non-judgmental communication is a big part of it, which is terribly difficult, because as human beings, we live with cognitive bias. We have our own views about ourselves, the world, and others around us, and and sometimes you'll hear things as a MHFA that will shock you or
Mm.
surprise you. But you can't show that that's happened. You have to accept someone for who they are. So non-judgmental communication, acceptance of people, acceptance of what you're hearing, are all parts of this. And about communication, to have a really in-depth conversation, to show someone that you genuinely care, you genuinely want to hear what they've got to say, that you understand what they're saying or are striving to understand what they're saying. So there are techniques around that, how you have a very, very um, uh, uh, a very I suppose the term is meaningful, a very meaningful
Mm.
conversation with that person, and and encouraging people to feel comfortable about sharing. And that isn't as easy as you might think, because we normally don't allow ourselves to really deeply get involved in conversations. We're
Mm.
distracted or whatever. We've got stuff going on, our phones in our pocket buzzing away. The temptation is to sort of half hear someone, talking to a degree in platitudes, but to really concentrate on what that person is saying and be curious about what that person means. So when you say, am I right in understanding you're saying this, this, and this? Am I right? Have I got that right?
Mm.
Really interrogate in a compassionate way what they're saying. And that person then thinks they really do care about what I'm saying. And they're very, very interested and invested. And therefore, I trust them. And that's how you build rapport. So those are one of the sort of key things that you develop skills in is
Mm.
communication and non-judgmental communication, because it's so difficult, really tough to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, so much of our language, like you say, it's built on opinion and all kinds of sort of sub meaning and everything. So
Mm.
so yeah, it's fascinating. So thinking forwards to the future and about the games industry in the UK, then I mean, what's your vision for the future of mental health support in the industry? What would you say to this?
Well, I think my vision would be that the whole thing becomes normalized, that the subject matter isn't a feared, misunderstood topic, that it's actually something that is part of the working world. Um, because and it's very difficult to do that because we've all got our own opinions and our own views. But if you can make or create an environment where people can talk openly without fear of being judged unfavorably, without fear of being stigmatized or discriminated against, that people can just come to work as themselves. And if people are struggling, that they feel okay about being open and honest about that. And so I think that would be a brilliant vision for me for the future. And in our small way at Mind Fitness, every time we run a training program, I mean, just finishing off tomorrow, a lovely group of mental health first aiders who will be certified tomorrow. 10 people we've got in the course at the moment, and all of those people, it always amazes me how invested and how committed they are in wanting to go out into the workplace and make a difference. And, they all represent different studios and different facets of the games industry in the UK, but they all have the sort of similar qualities of compassion and caring and what have you. And so the more people that are in that situation, the more I feel that we will get to a point where there's a normalization of talking about mental health. It's not a niche thing. It's not a stigmatized thing. It's not a subject that's full of myth and mystery and misunderstanding. And that people who need support and help get that. People who need to be given time to recover will be given that time to recover. And that everybody understands that even if you think at the moment that you have largely good mental health, same with physical health, that could change. It can
Mm.
change like that. And so we can't go, well, this is all these people over here, and I'm over there, and there's this huge divide. We're all human,
Mm.
and we all have the vulnerabilities of being human. So we need to think of it more like that. So yeah, but I'm seeing change happening, and it's gradual, but it's happening. So in 20 years' time, I hope it'll be totally different, and we will be, mental health will be just something we talk about openly. Maybe in 10 years' time.
Let's hope so. I mean, that's a fantastic vision for the future, but it's really good to hear that you're already identifying a significant change, well, within this industry and beyond, hopefully. So that's really fantastic to hear. Well, Andy, thank you so much. It's been really, really fascinating talking to you. I think there's so much there for people and companies to consider, especially around those courses. And we'll provide a couple of links to the next course down at the bottom of the description of this video. So yeah, we've got your details for people to reach out to you as well. But thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it. It's been really fascinating. Thank you.
Well, I've enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me there. It's been
Good.
good to chat.
Absolutely, definitely. And I guess thank you today for our audience who tuned in to catch this video. There's plenty of other need to know videos out there on our Ukie TV channel on YouTube. Thank you for enjoying this one, and more very soon. Thank you so much.